Thank you all for coming. This is a continuation of the Latham Lecture Series for the spring 2018. We are focused this semester in particular on ethics, emerging technology, and design. My name is Laura Forlano. I'm an associate professor here at the Institute of Design, and glad that you are here today. So I'm delighted to announce Andrea Guzman. She is an assistant professor at Northern Illinois University, and we met a couple of years ago because she's been a pioneer in the International Communication Association, building a community around human-machine communication. More recently, she's actually turned that community, which has met over the last several years at the main conference, into a book project on human-machine communication, rethinking communication technology and ourselves, by Peter Lang, which is coming out this year. And she's also published in Journalism and Mass Communication Quarterly, First Monday, and Communication Plus One. And her work includes both human-machine communication, which she's going to talk to us about today, but also people's perceptions of artificial intelligence and the way in which they function as communicators and the integration of AI into journalism. So with that, I'm delighted to invite Andrea to present. And she's going to talk for about 30 to 45 minutes, and then we'll take a few facilitated questions and then open Q&A.
Well, thank you for coming. I'm excited to see you all here because it's so nice outside. So, but yes, so as Laura so kindly introduced me, I am a scholar of human-machine communication, and I come out of the communication discipline. And so I'll explain a little bit more about what that does, but also how that reaches across multiple fields. It's an interdisciplinary area of work. And again, my specialty and my driver in this is artificial intelligence, particularly digital interlocutors, such as Siri, Alexa, Cortana. Just for show of hands, how many of you have Alexa at home? Okay. How many of you use Siri or Cortana at some level? Okay. A few hands. Okay, right. So you all kind of know what I'm talking about. So I basically spend my time talking to machines, because I like them better than people, and talking to people about how they talk to machines. And thinking about the design elements and how the design elements are put into practice and how meaning is derived out of that. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So because we are an interdisciplinary audience, I just want to start off talking about communication. And I'm going to talk about several different definitions of communication and how communication works during this talk. Right? And normally when we think of communication, we think of a human process. That's been the default throughout history, and so we may think of a message coming through a TV, a message coming through a radio, paper. So I'm also a former journalist, so this is Horace Greeley for any of you who are journalism buffs out there, and then the telephone and how we talk through, and the way we thought about communication, right? It's a human process. And it's a human-to-human process. When technology gets involved, right? It's a facilitator. It's a mediator. Right? We speak through the paper. We speak through, literally, the telephone, the TV, and the radio. And it's important to note that the area of communication really started to formulate as mass communication industries themselves started to formulate. And so our paradigms and the way that we understand communication within my discipline, right, is what we would talk about the transactional model of communication. And the way we see it is, face-to-face, right, interpersonal, types of communication where you have a communicator exchanging messages. Right? I know this is a little hard to see, so the message is here. So at either side, we encode and we decode. Right? We kind of make sense of the message. And so this is a traditional model of interpersonal communication. The communication discipline came out of two different areas. The first was speech and rhetoric, which developed over thousands of years. And then we have the mass communication part of the discipline, which developed, again, around those mass communication technologies of newspapers, radio, and TV. And so how that gets conceptualized in here is this idea of the channel. Right? The channel comes in. So it's a very anthropomorphic paradigm of what communication is and does. And up until about 5-10 years ago when I started doing, 5 years ago when I started doing my work, computer-mediated communication was the prevalent way of conceptualizing, with the latest technology, right? And so we have a computer, or here, an early iPhone. I love the Big Bang Theory. And so, you have Jim Parsons, talking through, sending messages through the phone to Will Wheaton. And interacting, again, the phone is just there to send the message, right? That's what it does. It facilitates that communication. Human-machine communication is a little bit different in that we put the technology into the position of communicator. And so here's an example from the book Siri and Me, when Siri first came out. Call me crazy Siri, but I love you. And I don't know if you can see this, but it says, okay, calling Daisy, would you like to call Homer Mobile? Right? This kind of riff on how Siri does not work. Right? But this exchange of message, not through the machine necessarily, but with the machine. And so that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today, is exchanging this message with the machine and how communication shapes our understanding of the machine. Now, in my discipline, this idea is somewhat radical. Right? A few years ago, I had another colleague, people walked out of a presentation on human-machine communication and said, this really doesn't belong in the discipline of communication. I have had other people, tell me that, it's kind of like communication, but it's not communication. And where we've seen this change, and why, I actually had to start a field within my discipline on this, is with Siri and with Alexa. And now that people have devices, actually talking back, right? The bells are going off, like, wait a minute, there's something different going on here. Now, for people in the HCI community, right, or the CSCW community, this is a bit of an older concept. So that's where I want to go back to. I want to take a step back, and I want to think about communication more broadly, right? Because communication has actually had a really important role in the design and development of technology, particularly when we're talking about the design and development of computers historically. So when computers were being developed, right, one of the biggest issues was getting input into them, right, and getting that output back out in a way that made sense, right, made sense for humans. And so throughout the literature, very early on, this was seen by engineers as a problem of communication. And so we have here from Licklider and Clark, right? So, Licklider, a visionary in developing communication with and through the computer, designing computers generally, right? So online and man-computer communication requires much development before men and computers can work together effectively in formulative thinking and intuitive problem solving, right? So in other words, we have to set up this message exchange, right? That was the meaning of this communication. And yes, man is being used here, in 1962, the default male, but it also it very much meant men, right? So if you go through these texts and you look at these texts, these examples, the design of the computer is built around a male understanding of use, right? And who was doing what at that time. And then we also have Oberquell we now are 20 years later, right? And we're talking about, not the bulky computers taking up a room, right? And just trying to get input in and out. We're talking about the personal computers that are moving into workspaces. Those, first, IBMs, Macs, but still we have this issue of communication. As the problem of today's computer use mainly result from difficulties in the communication between human and the machine. So again, thinking about, this is a communication problem. The solution The solutions that were offered were also solutions of communication, but they were solutions of human communication. So what's important to remember is early computer research is drawing on a metaphor, more so of communication. This could be like human and machine, or like human, but they're also developing solutions, right? In that, we want to have voice communication, right? Not just because it's cool, right? But we want to have voice communication because it's seen as what's most natural for humans, right? And so here we have Hayes and Reddy in 1979 talking about, we believe that graceful interaction and these and the many other contingencies that can arise in human conversation is essential if interfaces are ever to appear cooperative and helpful, and hence be suitable for the casual or naive user, and more habitable for the experienced user. Right? So thinking about, all right, how can we model our technologies on human communication in a way to facilitate use, right? And I just love this, an anatomy of graceful interaction, right? In spoken and written man-machine communication. Right? So not just about getting something done, but getting something done well, right? We also see that with Licklider, who's trying to promote the man-machine symbiosis. And so within these contexts, and within what we know of as the HCI context, right? Communication is meant to be a facilitator of computer use. By the way, can you all hear me? Okay. I don't hear well, so I don't always hear myself speaking. Okay. So it's meant to be a facilitator. So here we have, and this is one of the few books that is actually on man-machine communication by Meadow. And defining man-machine communication is a two-way conversation that is goal-oriented, aimed toward the accomplishment of a specific objective, and in which both parties contribute a necessary function. So both the human is going to bring something, the machine is going to bring something. Right? They're meant to complement each other so they can get stuff done. And then we also have Reeves and Nass, right? So Clifford Nass within the HCI community until his death was one of the drivers of the computers as social actors paradigm, right? We have everyone expects media to obey a wide range of social and natural rules. All these rules come from the world of interpersonal interaction and from studies about how people interact with the real world, right? But all of them apply equally well to media. And so what Reeves and Nass had done was they set up a series of experiments in which they designed computers with various social and human cues. And they looked at the ways people would react to them. Right? And they found that people in interacting with computers, displaying these cues, right, such as gender and voice, such as specific personality, would act toward these computers in many of the same ways that they would other humans. So what does this mean? This means that when people are interacting with technology, right, they're drawing from what they know. And this gets a little bit more important as I continue on. They're drawing from what they know. As communicators, as people thinking about communication, we think of communication as talking, right? And so when you interact with someone for the first time, right, you may not know them, but you may know enough about them to help you guide that interaction, right? You've talked with other humans before. I'm meeting many of you all for the first time today, right? But if we were to talk afterward, we would have a sense of how to talk, right? Because we're in a specific area, right? And so we draw from what we would call scripts, communication scripts, to help guide us. And so what Reeves and Nass initially found, and has been shown over and over again, is that when computers activate those scripts in our brains, then we'll behave toward them like that. And so that's what I look at. And so this is where we are now, right? So that was 70 years of computer communication history, which I can talk about forever. And I always like to stress, and I don't know if I necessarily have to stress it as much with this crowd as I do with some of the other people I speak with, but the fact that we have digital interlocutors, the fact that we have robots, the fact that we have social bots, and things designed to communicate directly with us is not an accident. This has been worked at, this has been the design, this has been the goal, right, since the get-go. We've just had to bring a lot of different technologies there to get it. So I don't know, are all of you familiar here? Who knows what this is? Anyone? Jibo, right? So Jibo is a new social robot for the home, is now available on the market, and Jibo can help you send information, but Jibo will also talk with you, Jibo will recognize you, Jibo will recognize members of the family, right? This is a depiction, right, of a social bot. Okay. In other words, those automated accounts that will interact with you on Twitter that we hear so much about right now. And you know, Facebook and what Mark Zuckerberg is testifying about right now. Anyone know who this is? Who this is a depiction of? There's all, yes. Cortana. It is Cortana, right? So Cortana, how many of you are familiar with the fact that Cortana was a Halo character before Microsoft? Right, okay, so Microsoft deliberately, right, based its assistant on this. Right, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this and the man-machine aspect in a moment. Okay, so that's what Cortana was modeled after. And if you looked at early Cortana marketing materials, they actually reference Halo and said just like the Halo character, and everyone's like, no, Microsoft, no, and that has now dropped out. All right, and then here's another. A humanoid robot as well, right? So I'm interested in, right, now that we've designed these technologies, how do we make sense of them? And there is a fundamental shift in terms of communication, which is really important that we need to talk about. And that is the difference between interactivity and subjectivity. Right? So interactivity, right, within communication research and computer-mediated communication is how people interact through a technology. Okay? And so, whereas technology serves as a mediator for humans, that mobile phone was allowing Tim Parsons to speak with Bill Eaton. The technologies that we are seeing emerge now, right, the Alexa that's in your house, right, is now designed with a level of what we call subjectivity. In other words, it's a technology that is designed as a communicative subject. It's designed as an entity, and so when you're communicating, with it, right, that's how you're using it. Use is communication directly with the device. Right? And so this idea of subjectivity. So moving beyond this idea of technology, as less as of a tool that we do something to, and technology as something that we make sense with. And that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit more. All right. So within the discipline of communication, right, so fun fact, we have no set definition for communication within our discipline. Right? There's a lot of reasons for this. Mainly because we come out of so many different areas, right? We have two historical areas. But there's two thoughts on communication, right? The first is the transmission of information. And that's what I typically think of communication as a little c. In other words, this is what most people associate with communication. So what are you doing when you're communicating? You're exchanging a message, right? I'm talking to you all now, you all are giving me feedback, right? And so when we think of the HCI model in particular that has been built up, it is one of communication as transmission, right? And this is the historical model within the design of computers, right? So we can view the fundamental task of human-computer interaction as moving information between the brain of the user and the computer. Progress in this area attempts to increase the useful bandwidth across the interface by seeking faster, more natural, and more convenient communication means. The facilitation of information for use, transmitting information, getting it done. Now, there have been some exceptions, and I'm going to bring them in later, but I want to mention them now. One is Lucy Suckman's work, okay? And understanding the meaning-making process with machines that we also draw in, as well as the scholars in STS, feminist studies, that I'm going to bring in some more. But overall, the predominant paradigm within HCI, right, historically, has been this idea of communication as transmission of information. Right. In communication, however, and this is where I'm situated within communication, I am actually a cultural studies scholar. Right? So I come at this, I was trained in cultural studies, and so here I'm going to draw from the work of James Kerry. James Kerry is a famous communication theorist who is really easily accessible for people in an interdisciplinary fashion. So if you don't know much about communication, you want to learn more about it, James Kerry's book, Communication as Culture, is wonderful. It's a great starting point, and within our discipline, it's part of, for the cultural studies people, it's part of our canon, right? And so here, it's not just sending things, right? More is going on when we're communicating. We're creating reality. So a ritual view of communication is directed not toward the extension of messages in space, but toward the maintenance of society in time. Not the act of information, but the representation of shared belief. And so for James Kerry, and this idea of ritual, thinking through this, what does it mean that we are all together here in this space today? What do we do in this ritual of lectures, right? Beyond the information I'm sharing for you, what does it mean for you to be here, right? Who does it mark you as to be here? Right? And so that sort of thinking, right? And so reality then is not given. So it's not humanly existent. It's independent of language and toward which language stands as a pale refraction. Language is important, but rather reality is brought into existence, is produced by communication, by, in short, the construction, apprehension, and utilization of symbolic forms. So in other words, communication is not something that just exists within a space. It creates the space. Within this moment, right now, we are creating the reality that's occurring between us. And so this is where I come from. And so I want to return now to human-machine communication as we've currently developed it, and I have developed it within the book that's coming out. Right? And that is, human-machine communication is more than just the transmission of information. What we're interested in, and what is a very useful way of thinking about communication, beyond how do we just get a message to a person, how do we get a person just to use Siri, how do we get a person to just use Alexa, is what is the meaning among humans and machines that are created together. And as an area of study, right, within communication, so communication has, as a discipline, multiple areas of study. We have journalism, we have public relations, we have speech. It's the study of the creation of meaning among people and machines and aspects thereof, and is inclusive of the different philosophical, theoretical, and methodological approaches within the discipline. Right? Like many disciplines, we have fractures across different lines having to do with method, right? Here we're saying, no, we need everyone to help us figure this out. Okay. Let me give you an example, though, what I mean about the creation of meaning among humans and machines. So for those of you who have Alexa in here, what do you ask Alexa for? Or what do you say to Alexa?
What's the weather?
Okay, weather. Okay, what's the weather? How many weather, right? Tell me a joke. Okay. What else?
Set the alarm.
Set the alarm. Yeah.
Play a radio station.
Play a radio station. Okay.
Reminder.
Alexa keeps my shopping list for me. Okay. Yes. Right. It's great. So I have a graduate student who lives with her significant other, and they have Alexa as well. And we were talking about how the fact that, we're starting to, we were talking about this idea of meaning among humans and machines. And she's like, oh my goodness. I'm like, what? She's like, the other day, my significant other said, Claire, what time is it? And she's like, do you know what I said to him? I said, no. She's like, I'm not Alexa, ask her. Right. So, these are the type of things we tend to chuckle about, right? Or you hear about the kids. I don't know if any of you have children, but the kids will say goodnight to Alexa, interact with Alexa. But for me as a communication scholar, that right there is important. Because having Alexa within the space, in Claire's mind, certain questions are no longer human questions. Okay? Certain questions are now below Claire, right? She was insulted. She said, I was legitimately insulted. Like, why are you interrupting me to ask me what time it is when we have Alexa, right? Now, I think some of that can also be, living with someone, and sometimes you don't want to be interrupted. But the fact that that's an Alexa question. Right? So now we're thinking about how are we setting up, habits around this technology, and what are we taking away from it? What is this new reality with the technology? And so I we only have a few minutes, so, oh no, I'm okay. We got plenty of time, don't worry. I know it's after lunch, and what it's like to sit through after lunch. But I do want to go through an example, and this example is my main area of research, and that is what I did for my dissertation was I interviewed people about their interactions and conceptualizations of Siri, right, when Siri was first coming out. And so I think, I want to kind of walk you through how we can understand Siri as a communicator, and how, then I'm going to have a discussion with you about how this can help to inform design. Right? So Siri, when Siri was first launched, right, we had, and here is one of the initial screenshots, right? Siri, your wish is its command. So let's think about communication just in terms of transmission. Right? Let's just, in terms of transmission. What does Siri say? Right? So Siri establishes itself as a communicative subject. You can't see her, right? But you get a sense of who or what Siri is as a communicator. So first and foremost, your wish is its command. Right? So you understand that this is something that will serve me. Right? She would then say things like, I'm your humble servant. Right? She was billed as a personal assistant. In her messages, right, she would also send messages of how can I help, right? Would apologize if something went wrong, right? You could yell at Siri and she would not yell back. So from a communicative standpoint, right, in those messages, right, that sets up who Siri is. Another way Siri is set up in our minds is through those Easter eggs, through those elements of play. Right? So one of the famous things people would do when Siri first came out, right, is ask her about Hal, right? And her reply was, Hal was, a bad robot, or she would also sometimes reply, I wish we could get over that. Right? Sometimes she would say, she would jokingly use the Hal voice and say, if you would ask her to open the pod bay doors, and she would be like, fine, take your shoes off. Right? And then if you would ask her about Eliza, and here I'm talking about Wise and Bounds Eliza. How many of you are familiar with Eliza? Okay, for those of you who are not, Eliza was an application developed by Joseph Weizenbaum, and it was modeled after a Rogerian therapist, right, in the 1960s. So people could come in and sit down and talk with Eliza through a typewriter, right? So they would type in a question, and Eliza was programmed to answer back, right? An early kind of Turing machine, if you want to think about it that way. And so if you would ask Siri about Eliza, she would say, Eliza's retired right now, but we're good friends. So within those messages, right, those kind of joking messages, Siri is sending also a message of what she is, right? She's not something like Hal, right? Siri's not bad AI, right? Siri's smart AI. Siri has this backstory. And again, we can see over here if you look, there's no please or thank you, right? These are commands. These are not, Siri, please do this. Siri, please do this. Siri, please do this. This is command. So Siri is set up as helpful AI. In addition, from a communication perspective, we would go beyond the message. We would think about what sort of form or interaction is taking place. And interaction with Siri, like Alexa, and many other, these technologies, are set up as dyadic interactions. Meaning, they seem like they're an interaction between one person, between you and Alexa, between you and Siri. So you get the sense, right, and you're going to draw from your knowledge of what goes on in a one-to-one interaction, right? So the sense, it gives the sense then very much that you're interacting directly with Siri. So it's developed, as this thing that serves you, and then it has some elements of voice, right? It's witty, not too witty, right? It defers to you. It's got a female voice, and it's billed as an assistant. So it's building off this heuristic of a secretary, right? Very much, and that's powerful. And in some ways, you need a heuristic because how are people supposed to interact with this technology, right? They've really never talked with a technology before. And so here, though, comes in the other area, and that is, from the point of human-machine communication, it's not just the communication that's occurring, but what has been communicated about these technologies, right? So they brought in the Hal and they brought in the Eliza, remarks because they knew that people, the only kind of way that people can make sense of these technologies was building off of science fiction. Right? They've never encountered these in person. No one has ever encountered a Siri, right? You can't see it. Right? You got to make sense of it. And so using these heuristics from science fiction. And when Siri came out, Siri was also depicted in numerous ways. And it's hard to see, but here Siri is a voluptuous brunette woman, right? And she's kind of sitting in this computerized area, has a flat screen in front of her. This also is from the Big Bang Theory. Right? There was an episode in which Raj falls in love with Siri, right? So we saw a bunch of this when Siri was first launched. And so, Siri is taking on this human type form. And we can laugh about this, but when I talk to people about how they conceptualize Siri, many people would say, oh, a woman sitting in a radio room, right? I would get all sorts of variations from machine to person, right? And many people encountered Siri on the media before they encountered her in person. So this is another factor to consider, is how, when we're doing design, right, and communicative design, how does communication about this entity and previous entities enter into our minds? Okay. So up until this point, people, for the most part, had typed with technology, right? Tapped technology. And I would ask some people, who didn't use Siri, why not? And they would say, well, I'm an old-fashioned Googler, which just made me giggle, right? Because Google hasn't been around that long, right? But they meant typing. And so what we're seeing with Siri is a new way, and all these other technologies, a new way of communicating with machines. And so we're trying to make sense of these technologies, right, based on, all right, what do we know of a technology, but it's got human-like characteristics. So what people have to do is they have to work really hard to try and reconcile those different aspects. Right? But as humans, right, as very smart people, we adapt very quickly. And so when I was talking with people after Siri had been launched, and now Cortana is coming out, Google Voice is coming out, the prototype was no longer from science fiction necessarily. Who do you think the prototype was for people using Cortana and Alexa? It was Siri. Siri became the prototypical technology, right? And so now, right, what's guiding them in their head, right, are these previous interactions or what they've seen of interactions, right, on TV with these technologies. Right? So we have people still interacting old ways of technologies, tapping, touching. We have people seeing these new technologies being portrayed on TV. We have people interacting with certain new technologies and building up ideas and communication about them. And so for designers of technology, right, now they have to try and reconcile this, right? And they have to try and reconcile it in ways that will make sense when the product gets to market, right? which is very difficult. And so what we're seeing is a communicative shift with technology. Right? We've always communicated with technology, but what we're undergoing is a very important shift in how we make sense of technology. Right? In that it's becoming a communicative subject, and so that brings in this whole new area of design. Right? So what I've been really kind of talking about mostly, though, is that transmission angle, right? So let's think a little bit about the ritual angle. Right? How is our reality being created? What is our reality now? And what is going on there? Right? And so this is where those critical questions of, okay, yes, we do need to model technology after something. Right? If people don't see a use, it'll fail. Google Glass, right, is an example. People didn't know what to do with it. Right? They didn't have a heuristic for it. But at the same time, you know, what we saw in Siri, and there was a lot of debate about this, right, is the fact that, you know, you're reproducing, you know, women in a particular way. And so what does it, you know, mean to reproduce groups in a certain way? Right? Also, there's a lot of groups who are excluded from these technologies. Right? These technologies, when they're designed, voices, they're primarily white, right? Middle class, right? Very, very specific way of speaking. And so a lot of times they're drawing on databases and corpuses that do not include accents. And so, you know, what does that culturally mean as well for who's included and excluded from technology? The other thing, I want to kind of think about this idea of the dyadic interaction again with Siri. So you get the sense that you're talking directly with Siri, right? Or you get the sense that you're talking directly with Alexa. And it's just you in the conversation, unless someone else is in the room. But is it just you in the conversation? Does the information just stay between you two? No. Siri and Alexa, they like to run their mouths, right? I mean, if you're going to set up the stereotype, I'm going to take it all the way. But right, they take your information back to Apple. They take your information back to Google, you know, Amazon, or whoever. And people at first didn't realize this, and people don't think about it, right? Because the interaction they're involved in, what they're drawing on, is a human-to-human interaction. And so it's a very powerful way of collecting information without people realizing it. And now people are realizing it. Just to kind of diverge for a moment, thinking about, you know, what's going on with Zuckerberg. I was listening to the testimony yesterday. Was anyone else listening to the testimony? Okay. At one point, you know, he was talking about the fact that, well, you know, people all the time set their profiles to public. So he's like, and so people choose to share all of their information with the world, right? People choose to have it public so everyone can see it, everyone in the world. But is that how people are choosing to share their information? No. Because when we're interacting on Facebook, we have something that's called the imagined audience. We have people in our head that we think we're posting to, right? We don't necessarily think that, okay, I'm posting to mom, dad today, right? Or, you know, friends today, but we do. And we think of ourselves in interactions with those people, right? And that just it kind of shows this disconnect between Silicon Valley and how people make sense of technologies, but also how powerful our communication expectations can be in not only helping us interact with technology, but also in, you know, hiding aspects of the technology, right, from us. And so the other, you know, last, you know, idea of social here is this question of social actors, these technologies as social subjects, not just being things we use, but entering into our social world. And I'm not talking necessarily about deliberate anthropomorphization, but in ways of, there are these entities we interact with. Again, that's a question for Alexa, not for a human. And so how will these technologies, in the way they're designed and the way we make sense of them, continue to move into our social world, and what will they mean? And so that's the bigger questions people like me are after. Right? We have to start with the basics of how people actually use technology, right, to get there, to critique it, but that's, the bigger question. And so, right, I'm seeing it's about 1:10, right? So this is where, we can have a discussion about design, about what you all are interested in, questions, all that good stuff. I know I was throwing out a lot out there. Thank you for your patience. But yes?
Yeah, so I'll start with a question. Because, and I don't know if Chris is here in the room, but we're talking about some of these kinds of projects and the principles and methods of user research. Okay, yeah. So,
I think it's on now.
I killed it.
Okay, well then.
There are like millions of batteries right here.
The technology that mediates is getting jealous of the technology that's a communicator subject. That's what's going on here. It's really good.
I thought I just heard it all. Oh, there you go.
Okay, so the question I was going to ask, and specific to a project that's happening in the Principles and Methods of User Research course, is to tell us a little bit about how you study the human interactions with Siri or Alexa. And in particular, one of our students was looking at a previously published paper that had captured all the data digitally about the human interactions with Alexa, and what would that type of study tell you versus, for example, doing an in-home ethnography where you observe or question. And so I want to hear just about your methodology and how you do those studies.
Sure, I can definitely do that. So I focus on people's conceptualizations of technology. In other words, what do they imagine it to be? What do they think it to be? So I speak directly with people. And we have conversations about the technology. Now, the difficult thing, right, is if you just walk up to someone at Union Station, and I did some of my work at Union Station. FYI, the Amtrak never runs on time. People are bored. They will talk to you if any of you ever need to do that type of research. All right. I would first just start talking about technology generally. Tell me about the type of technologies that talk, right, that we talk to. And they would then say Siri or Alexa wasn't out yet. And I would just say, tell me about Siri. And so we would talk about how they would use it, and then I would be like, how would you describe Siri? And so different questions, and again, it depends on your theoretical framework. Those questions come out of your theoretical framework, meant to probe, and in different ways. So that's one thing you can do. If you want to, it's awesome that you have those chat logs. A lot can be revealed through chat logs, right? And so there, you probably want to look at themes. So if you're interested more in use, right? Or what is, Alexa? What does this person think Alexa is? How is Alexa being talked to, right? Is Alexa being talked to politely? What is being asked of Alexa? How good is Alexa? My Alexa is horrible. I don't know if many of you know this, but you can go into your app, and Alexa will actually spell out what you think you're saying, and it's horrible, and it's hysterical, right? So that's also something to look at. And so that would be more, of a discourse analysis, what we would call a discourse analysis. And then there's the ethnography, where you're in the home, and you want to see not just what do people say about how to make sense, right? Or not just people look at people's words or how they interact. But what is going on when that interaction is occurring? Who else is in the room? When they're saying, Alexa, dot, 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 is it jokingly? Right? Sometimes you can't tell that necessarily from a transcript. And then how is Alexa weaving itself into everyday life? Right? When are people turning toward Alexa instead of their partner? Right? When are people turning toward Alexa to do things instead of the old way of paper and pen? So ethnography is very much about looking at lived experiences. Sorry. And so sometimes students will say, they'll look at transcripts, or they'll think about ethnography, and they're like, but it just seems so boring, right? People are just asking such boring things. I'm like, yeah, that's the point, right? That's the point. It's the mundane. And I have a paper on Siri I can share it with you all if you're interested, in that it's in this mundaneness, this constant use, that we come to understand what something is. And so that mundane is very important. And so, seeing how people make sense, interact, and weave it into their lives, and seeing how different people do that. I'm really interested to see what people do with Jibo, now that Jibo's out. Children and Alexa is fascinating to me. The one thing, whenever I talk about Alexa, people always come to I have to tell you the story about my kid. Right? So stories about, and I see some of you laughing out there, right? Alexa, make me a sandwich. Right? Well, Alexa has no arms, right? And Sherry Turkle's work. For those of you who aren't familiar, Sherry Turkle did a lot of this work with children. Right? But children are making sense of their world. And what to me is fascinating about Alexa is that we now have a generation of children who are going to learn to communicate with an artificial entity as they're learning to communicate with humans. That's huge. We don't know where that's going to lead, but that's huge. So, yeah. Does that answer?
Absolutely, that's great. And I think I will open it up now to the group, and then I may actually interject other questions later as well. Anyone have a question on the tip of your tongue? Yes, back there. You're probably going to have to project.
Come on down. It's like The Price is Right, but you don't win anything.
So my question for you is, have you had any experience in studies just in different demographics? Because for me, I've done research with children and Alexa, Siri as well,
okay.
And I found some amazing results from that. But just wondering on your thoughts on that, and if you've had experience with mainly the elderly or children, because there's a big demographic that's being forgotten.
Right. Thank you for bringing that up. So, and this is important, and let's have the research talk about this. And I'm so glad you brought that up. So, in terms of human-machine communication, this is brand new. I'm literally in communication. I'm literally writing the book, and so there's not a lot there, which is awesome for those of you looking to publish. Right? Okay. So, I mainly dealt with adults. And Siri users within that context, because that's who Siri was, more intended for. But what's really important, I'm glad you brought this up, is to think about those different demographics, right? To think about children, and to think about people who are older. How many of you have seen the Saturday Night Live skit? Okay, so this is a really important point, I will make it short, but Saturday Night Live came up with an Alexa, but for older people. And so it answers to something like 200 different names, like Alejandra, right? And things like, turn up my thermostat. And they're like, but it's already 95 degrees in here, all right? So it's built upon these jokes of older people using technology. And so we laugh, but those are very unfortunate stereotypes, right? Because we do know that older people use, for example, Facebook. My friend Kelly Quinn at the University of Illinois at Chicago, if you're interested in people using technology who are, 45, or I would say 50 and older, that's her area of work. And that's not even that old, we just know that's a demographic marker, right? it's really important because hands-free technology can really be helpful and can be really important to them. The other thing, though, is thinking about in terms of who can have an Alexa, who can't have an Alexa, right? So thinking about what do you need for Alexa? You need Wi-Fi, right? And so there's certain entire classes who can't have Alexa. They can't afford an Alexa. And then thinking about the terms, the fact of Alexa listening in, right? So Amazon says no, it's not recording anything. But certain groups having Alexa in their home, potentially, even if it's not doing that, concerned with the aspects of Alexa doing so. And so these are all very important questions. Thinking through, beyond how is it situated, the ways is it situated, how can it be used other, who's being left out, always a great question. And how can we think about this differently? So excellent, thank you.
Along those lines, how do you take into account accents or slang used?
So what do you mean by that? Does it work? Does it not work? Or how do you do research around that? Or
yeah, exactly. Research around that because obviously East Coast accent versus West Coast accent.
Right.
Communicating to.
So in terms of that, you'll want to talk with people. We do know that accents are getting better. So I don't want to belabor the point because I know some of you know this in here, but Alexa and Siri make sense of information based on the corpus that's behind it. Right? So this also is what's interesting about communication. Humans, right, because of our experiences and because we've spent our entire life communicating, even when an accent is involved, we typically can make sense. Right? All these technologies have to have a prototype of that accent most of the time to make sense of it. Right? What's really interesting is children. I was just at a robotics conference with Cynthia Brazil and some other people. There's no corpus for children. It is extremely hard to design talking technologies for children, particularly between the age of 5 and 11. Right? They don't, first and foremost, they're learning to speak. They don't speak consistently. Their voices are changing. And so it's really hard to design technologies for them. And why that is because there's also no corpus. It's very hard to collect children's data. Right? I'm sure Amazon is loving all those kids talking. Right? That right there is a gold mine for Amazon. So getting back to your question, how do we... it depends on your question, right? So it's one question, who's being left out, right? And finding groups of people who we know Alexa or we know Siri do not work with, right? And talking to them about their experiences and talking to them about, what would you like to see done, right? Or how can this be done differently? And talking about that exclusion. But there's also, right, and so design is difficult. Because how many then, I'm thinking about the emoji, right? So the emoji issue, if everyone thinks about emojis, right, they used to be white, and now they're yellow, default yellow, right? And you can choose the skin color of your emoji. So one thing someone would say would be like, well, can you design an Alexa or Siri that speaks like me? Okay. How many Alexa and Siris are you going to have to design? Which I'm not saying they shouldn't go for it. I'm very much in favor, right, of wrestling with this issue. But there's also a design issue there of how do you do that, and how do you also do it in ways that are culturally sensitive, right? Communicatively sensitive. We know Silicon Valley is not very good at that. Okay. Does that speak to your question? Okay. Yes.
Yeah, similarly along this kind of, we're talking about diversity in general, I was interested to know, all of these products that we discussed today are global products. Siri is in, at least 100 plus countries. And a lot of the issues we talk about are very specific to the US version, right? In many countries, Siri is named Siri, but it's a man's voice, or that kind of thing. So I don't know if this type of work is being done in other geographies, and if there's kind of cross-cultural look at how these things vary.
Right. So I can say from more of a critical cultural standpoint there is, but not so much a design standpoint. there are some people, who are thinking of design in terms of making it more local. But no, we need that research. And so I am so glad there's so many students in here. We need that research, right? It's wide open. And so yes, my work was done at a time when Siri was just emerging. But yes, this is a great point because in the UK, Siri was Daniel, and Siri was modeled after the idea of the English butler. Okay? So again, this idea of who serves whom, right? And I know in other languages, that there are subservient cues in there. And so it's a great area for research, and it's one that's needed. So no, I haven't done that, so yes, please do. Does that? Yeah. Right. What other questions? Hi.
Kind of a more subtle question along this line. As humans, we very quickly determine the intelligence level of someone we're interacting with. So you see people when they talk to a child, because it's so obviously identifiable, quickly adapt a simpler vocabulary, perhaps. It's much more subtle in a disembodied machine, right? And so has there been work to talk about how to design dialogues according to intelligence levels, or any way, have people been discussing intelligence levels or capacity levels?
Right. Yeah, so if you think about the way the programs, and I know some people have looked at, how smart should they be or how smart shouldn't they be, right? Because no one wants an all-knowing AI right out of the box. I mean, imagine if Siri had been perfect. I mean, just think about that. If Siri had been perfect every single time, right? Freak out. As far as though designing for particular, I don't know. Because most of their intelligence, if you think of Siri, and Siri, I will say this, has gotten dumber. In that Siri no longer responds directly. Siri, what does Siri do? Goes to Google or goes to Wikipedia and gives you the information, right? And so here I'm making a judgment that she's gotten dumber because she's not giving me an interaction on her own or on its own. But no, that is an important area. And part of that also has to do with, you have the natural language programming and generation components, which are a type of AI. But then there's the also, just knowledge components. And those knowledge components right now are not built in, right? They go to a separate database. And so I think that is a good question about, how intelligent are they? How, because how many of you have ever called Alexa or Siri dumb? Okay, yeah, right? When they don't understand you, right? It's just amazing to me. 6 years ago, we didn't have talking technology. Now we're like, oh, that's a stupid one, right? Yeah. But no, I can look into it. I know people have talked about it, but I'm thinking more on the AI side, not necessarily on the design. Does that make sense? Sorry if...
Yeah, it does. And
okay.
I know on the AI side, there's a lot of work going on with knowledge representation and ontological systems that can know a lot. Yeah. And when those get bolted together with the front end, in the sense that we see here, we could see a dramatic increase in the intelligence.
Well, yeah, especially if you're going to combine Alexa with Watson, right? That type of thing. And so there you're bringing in, that type of. Now you have two distinct entities. I don't know how we're going to make sense of this. I do know in China there is the name is escaping me now, an interlocutor that's designed to be both emotional and rational. And you can choose which side you want to interact with. So research around that, and if you give me your card, I'll send you the name of that. May be helpful in that as well.
How does Siri deal with ambiguity in language?
All right, so how does Siri deal with ambiguity in language? He, whichever one you're interacting with, deals typically with it by saying, I'm sorry, I do not understand. Or I'm sorry, let me look that up. Or does this help? And then pull something from Wikipedia. Siri used to try and give more direct information, but people were getting frustrated by it, and that's why Siri now draws directly from Wikipedia or Google. Now, on the back-end design side, I do not know. Don't work at Apple, and that's not my forte. I look more at the communicative elements. But again, thinking in human terms of when you don't know something, what would people want you to do, right? Try and help out. And although we like to dig on Alexa, Siri, Cortana, I do have a lot of people tell me that there's times where they'll ask Siri something or they'll ask Alexa something and they'll misunderstand, but actually misunderstand in a better way, right? So there's that as well, is when they interpret what you're doing, and that can be helpful. Yes. We have two. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
I had a father that recently went blind, so he's going through some technology withdrawal.
Yes.
And so I got him Alexa, and he trained to teach him how to interface with it. And he's just used to having that visual selection opportunity, the user experience is, doesn't have that paradox of choice of trying to figure out what does he really want. So I'm just wondering if also I can't help him set it up, because there's really no interface for me to do this remotely or work with him one-on-one.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you've heard anything about what's happening with for disabilities and accessibility.
That is such a good question, because if you think about voice technologies for a while, and I would run to this with some people in my research, they've been used to help people who are blind and to read things out. But you're right, in setting up Alexa, right? Alexa also does have visual cues. For those of you who don't have Alexa or the Echo, it has a ring, it'll glow different colors. So as far as with those, no, I don't think there's a lot of disability research going on with researchers that I know in communication. There may be some in the HCI community, and companies may be doing this on the back end we don't know about. For example, I was just at a food camp at Facebook, having some discussions with people about, discussing for people with disabilities, designing Facebook, for people with disabilities, and how, depending also on, is this a person who's recently blind? That's completely different than someone who's been blind since birth. And so I'm not aware of any. You could look. I'm trying to even think of where you look, and I really don't know. So it's a very good question. Yeah.
What do you think the future of this technology is, and how do you see it growing and changing?
Oh, okay. You guys got 3 more hours here? Okay. When I started doing this research, it wasn't even that long ago. My opinion changes, daily on it. I will say that technology companies are very committed to it. I will say that technology companies, you can't walk down the street without hearing the words AI, right? Another thing I think is interesting, the fact how quickly the word social bots has entered the vernacular, right? I've been teaching about social bots for a while, and I would always have to explain to my students what social bots were. Now they're coming into my class being like, oh yeah, the social bots, or the bots, right? So to answer your question, and to kind of dovetail with what you were pointing out earlier, I think what we're going to see are increasing ways to merge these technologies to make them more ubiquitous, right? And we already see that Amazon's trying to do this. They want to put Alexa in your car. They want Alexa to follow you around. And so it becomes kind of this trusted brand, right? And as someone who studies automated journalism as well, I can tell you, another way to think about digital interlocutors are the technologies that are writing news stories right now, right? They take data sets and they write news stories. But then those news stories, right, can also be sent through Alexa. And so I think what we're going to see is these no longer being distinct technologies, but these technologies layering more and more. I will think you're going to the Silicon Valley is very much into giving a personalized experience and that personal social experience, right? You don't want technology to be cold. You want it to be your friend. And that's positive. So that's where I think, now that being said, who knows, right? But that is, those are the discussions I'm hearing around it. Does that speak to your question? Okay. And we have a question in the back now.
Yeah, you haven't mentioned anything about Google. Does that all apply to Google as well?
Yes. So Google has a voice. So it's really interesting how these all kind of rolled out.
you had Siri, and then you do have Google Home, right? And one thing I could have mentioned is I talked with people who had, Google Voice, various Google products. For them, a lot of times they would associate Google with just their phone. In other words, it was their phone talking to them, which is really interesting. And part of that is because Google, you say, hey Google, right? But it doesn't have a name. And so in linguistics, we would call that, or communication, you don't hail it. Hailing is when you use someone's name. And it's that hailing that can be very strong in evoking that anthropomorphic kind of response. And so overall, though, we're hearing less and less about Google's technology, right? Alexa is the one that's really ramping up. But no, that's one I haven't revisited, but I would be very interested to revisit, particularly now that it's in the home. Before, when I was doing this was before all the home technologies came out, I'd be really interested to see how people are making sense of Google in the home. So, people, it does have a gendered voice, people do pick up on that, but that's a really good question. Yep.
I was wondering if you've seen any benefits in kind of dehumanizing machines, like particularly looking at alternative conceptualizations of what AI could be, such as AI as a pet.
Okay, yeah, so first of all, if you're interested, so there is a movement, and there has always been a movement, to not create technology more human-like, but to actually purposely instill machinic qualities in to keep that anthropomorphizing at bay. So Eleanor Sandry, and that's spelled S-A-N-D-R-Y, has written a great book on robots and communication, where she talks about this, where she talks about setting up robots in other ways that aren't human forms. Okay, so again, that's Eleanor Sandry, and robots and communication. She's also going to have a chapter in my book on this very question of, even brings up the idea of designing technology in such a way where a person can set the set. So she gets this from Interstellar. I don't know if you've seen this. There's a robot in there where you can tell it to be funny or not funny and things like that. And, this idea of maybe we should let people have personalized human robot settings. Like, who would you rather interact with? And then, there are the Paros, there are, which is the seal, the dog type technologies. That's not, I don't focus on human-animal communication, but yeah, that's definitely a part of it. I will say I've heard less and less about that more recently, but again, that could also be, my work is more on the AI end, and that's more, sometimes the embodiment is more on the robotics end. I do know that, the robotics area, especially for children, this is growing. I know a lot of people working on technologies to bring them into the classroom, and so in some ways bringing in things that maybe they're not an animal, but they look like a woolly monster, something like that, that's really popular with children, to get them to interact with the robot. So if you're interested in something more in the non-human angle, I would look more at the robots for children, and Eleanor Sandry's work. Yeah?
So this is about one previous discussion that we just had. So why do you think the Siri is becoming dumber while it should be the other way around?
Oh. Okay. So why do I think Siri is becoming dumb when it should be the other way around? Because, and Sherry Turkle talks about this, when we instill someone or something with a human-like trait, it's like we go up to 11 with it, right? To use a Spinal Tap reference. In other words, we explain it to be fully that. And so what I mean by that is having Siri, be smart, and having Siri talk and having Siri tell jokes, people started to expect more out of it. Okay? But it couldn't deliver. And another thing to think about is Siri was delivered in beta, and that has to be delivered in beta. So I don't want to go too much into the AI angle, but in order for artificial intelligence to work, it needs data, and it needs learning data. And you can't get that in a lab. And so that's why it was released in beta. And so people were getting frustrated with it. People weren't finding a use for it because if you think about it, you can go up and ask a human anything. and so people were trying to, and so people were becoming frustrated. And so, I mean, I haven't spoken with Apple, but that's my take is, because now the default is Siri just goes to Wikipedia, or Siri just, it doesn't even try anymore. It's just like, I'm just gonna punch in the search. And it was because it was just becoming confusing and people didn't know what to do with it. Does that help? And was there another question in the back, or?
Yeah, what do you think about therapeutics in AI here? And therapeutics could be in the mending the psyche, positively or negatively?
Okay, so asking about the positive or negative aspects of having AI as a therapist. So this is going back to Eliza, right? So Eliza was designed to be a therapist. And just to kind of catch you all up on that, Weizenbaum, was doing this as a way to see if a certain technique would work for artificial intelligence, right? So he was more about testing out a particular technique of giving information. And so he built this idea of the Rogerian therapist. And it would say things like, "Ooh, that's interesting, tell me more," all right? So it never really responded, in definitive answers. And so Weizenbaum, though, found that this is at MIT, people were interacting with it and telling it private things. Because people got really angry when they found out that Weizenbaum had access to what we would call chat logs now. And Weizenbaum was astounded. He's like, this is not a real thing. You should tell this too. And so we've more recently seen this surge again of creating technologies that you can talk to, that are artificial, and you're actually seeing a big push for this right now in the military in terms of dealing with PTSD. There are not enough therapists employed by the VA to deal with PTSD. And the fact we've been in a war for 10 years and dealing with all those issues. And so one thought has been to have these artificial intelligence entities as therapists. Psychology is not my background, right? I will say as a humanist, right? And Sherry Turkle has talked about this, so I don't know if you've read any of Sherry Turkle's work, but when we think about, therapy, and we think about sharing, and is it the act of sharing, or is it the act of empathizing? That's most important. And I'm glad you brought this up, because this brings up a very good point. Communicatively, these technologies play a good game in setting themselves up as subjects, right? But they don't have empathy, right? And so there is a question of, if someone were to, and this is an ethics question, right? If someone were to be turning to Alexa, right, and saying, trying to discuss these with Alexa, should Alexa say, "This is not what I'm designed for. Here's something that should help"? Or should a program kick in on Alexa that says, "Oh wait, I'm supposed to go into therapist mode"? And those are literally life and death decisions when you're dealing with people with depression. My thoughts are that there should be limits. I am one of the people who thinks that's more supportive of the making sure that there's that machineness still instilled. That being said, we do also know that people will talk more to someone they don't know. And so this idea that, maybe people would open up more to a machine because they don't feel judged. And so there's also this issue, I think there's an ethical issue of talking with people themselves who are going through this. Talking with veterans themselves who are going through this. Or maybe offering choices. And then thinking of it from the patient's point of view. Right? Because in therapy, I don't want to get too far, in therapeutic situations, we tend to take this paternalistic view, right, of this is what's good for other people. But in some senses, maybe someone would want that. Like, look, I just need, when I come home, I live by myself, I just need something to talk to. Literally just so I can, get this off my chest. It's a difficult question. So, yeah. does that speak toward what you were asking, or?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I wanted some kind of a perspective of how you think that interaction goes into the communication field, because the communication field ends up being exchange of information, but that's just the surface.
Yeah.
And it affects the psyche, willing or not.
Yes.
And once it affects the psyche, then it has the opportunity to manipulate the psyche.
Yeah.
And manipulation of the psyche can be for good, for bad, progressive, regressive, and so forth.
And so here's the thing, even, and I know you have another question and comment, but here's the thing to remember too, that when we're designing or thinking about these technologies, right, we tend to get so focused on them as being this entity, right? Because you're designing a singular thing. But the people interacting with them are not, right? Are not. And we're just now, because they're just now becoming a part of our lives, we're just now making sense. And this is just one framework for making sense, but I really have to stress that I fully expect our communication with these to change. I fully expect for us to actually develop different ways of communicating with different assistants, like we do with different people. But this is just now beginning to all shake out. So yes, another question.
Yeah, would you see any value in an approach where you could possibly design into a system like this, where a person can get medical diagnostics by talking to this device with certain ailments or symptoms? Is it a safe thing or a dangerous thing?
Right, so this is actually a huge area in AI. Healthcare AI is huge. And also wearables for healthcare are huge. Everything from contacts, that can, this is a huge area. I am a doctor, but not that type of doctor is what I like to tell people. And so, could there potentially be helpful things? Maybe. If you just want to know, basic things like Alexa, what is the normal range of a fever, right? Or something. Those types of information. As far as diagnosing goes, it depends on the way that the technology is built, and it depends on what you're diagnosing. Do I think Alexa is WebMD is a good idea? No, right? Because, that type of thing. But, I mean, this is a big area where AI is going into, and it has all those ethical aspects. And that's not really my area of expertise, but it's very interesting to think about. I will say, from a communicative standpoint, though, this idea of communicating, with, a doctor as a person, or artificial intelligence, right? Which do you think is more intelligent, right? And in fact, we can think about it in different careers, right? Like, well, interacting with a store clerk versus AI, or interacting with someone who works at fast food versus AI, or interacting with a lawyer versus AI, right? And that gets into all sorts of questions about how we see people and how we see intelligence and how we see AI. So I really don't have a better answer for that, but it is a big area that's growing. So if you're interested in that, another great area. Yeah.
I'm late, but I have a question on regulation. I know you have covered that, but not only regulation from the state, but also these self-regulating bodies like healthcare and mental health. What's the role of those self-regulating professional bodies as well as obviously government itself?
Yeah, so that Facebook thing that's going on right now, because no one was regulating it? Yeah. Expect that with this. And now I will say there are groups, right, who are interested in regulation and who are part of this. And I will say Europe is way ahead of us on this. I know a lot of researchers, who are doing stuff with the European Union, such on, the dissemination of fake news, how AI has played into that. There is an international group of scholars who wants to, it's literally called Stop Killer Robots Now, right? And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get people to sign on, countries to sign on, to say, no, we will not use autonomous weapons. And so you're seeing it in some areas. France, some people I know just had a sit down with the French president, right, to talk about AI. And so countries are doing their own thing. I will say Europe is ahead of the United States. Under Obama, there was an artificial intelligence initiative that was started. And anyway, but it's just, it's you know, right? But there's also a lot of things we have to think about there. Should the government be thinking about it? Yes. What's driving it now? What's driving the development of AI? Well, it's Silicon Valley, and we do have, you know, researchers involved, you know, in academic spaces, but it's really, you know, how can we monetize this? And that's, you know, kind of the story of technology. Yes, go ahead.
I'm actually wondering if regulation and self-regulation can play a generative role in this. Well, because traditionally regulation comes in at the end.
Yes.
To avoid negative, but
Right.
it seems because it's so undefined, can actually policy and self-regulation play a generative role.
Yeah, so as far as, are you talking about self-regulation from industry or self-regulation from individuals even adopting these technologies?
Both.
Right, okay, so if we're thinking about self-regulation, and again, I haven't worked too much in this area, but, and some of you may have noticed this, when you first got Alexa, right, my husband whispered. He started whispering, like, why are you whispering? He's like, well, I didn't want Alexa to hear this. I'm like, yeah, that's not how that works. So, like, he may be right. Right? But, you know, so, you know, are there things you will say in front of your digital assistant, right? Or you won't say? Or you say, joking, Alexa, seriously, that was a joke. You know, FBI listening on the other side. Right? So do people, we don't know. I don't know. I don't have that answer of whether or not people do. But, you know, given how fast people are getting these technologies and not only getting, you know, an Alexa, but then hooking it up to their Nest and hooking it up to the refrigerator, the smart refrigerator that's coming out, the smart toilet that's coming out, right? That one, just the smart toilet, I don't get. But, yeah, and industry, you know, you hear, you know, Elon Musk, and that, you know, people talking about the dangers of AI. Part of the issue with AI, I don't want to get too far afield here, is there's many different definitions of AI. So when we're talking about AI, are we talking about the all-knowing, or what we would call general intelligence, right? Artificial general intelligence, which it would be more like a human, can function more like a human, or are we talking about what we call narrow artificial intelligence, where it does one thing, okay? And that one thing technology we have right now, right? But people, you know, there's always been kind of this idea of going toward this general intelligence. My thought is that there's not going to be self-regulation. And I know that sounds pessimistic, but there's so much money to be made here. I would be hopeful that companies would be reflective, but seeing kind of what's going on today with social media, we're not seeing necessarily the level of reflection we need to. And so it becomes really important, though, for designers to think about these issues and to think about what they will or won't be involved in. Google, I don't know if you heard this news, you know, sometimes companies take on, you know, DoD projects, and some employees, I believe it was Google are not happy about developing artificial intelligence, you know, as part of these projects. We actually had, I think it was the U.S. Army come to give a talk about funding for work, and I was encouraged by someone at my university to go because they fund, you know, a lot of this research. And I said no. And so part of this will come down to us as designers and us as researchers. And for those of you who don't know Joseph Weizenbaum, you know, he passed away a few years ago, but he really was a voice of ethics on this. I don't necessarily, I think he went a little bit further than I would. Sherry Turk was another voice, and again, I don't necessarily agree with her current work, although I agree with her current stance of let's make sure we're thinking about things. And so I think if we're going to build self-regulation in, it starts in this room. It starts in these spaces. And empowering, you know, people who are leaving these spaces to make better decisions. But we also need to have these discussions with, you know, Silicon Valley and the other places. So, yeah.
we're going to have to close it there since many of us have to get to class.